Alright everybody, welcome back to my channel. I recently did a video on a new Asterix game, which is basically a beat 'em up with really nice visuals. As I was doing a little bit of research on that game, I started doing research on some other beat 'em ups from the past. So for this video I'm going to start a small series on the history behind the beat 'em up genre. Basically, where did it all start, the changes that were made through the years on that genre, and basically talking about some past greats. Now for this video I will start with the 80s and break up each video to a specific decade. As a quick note, I will not include hack and slash games as part of the beat 'em up. So games like say Golden Axe, Ninja Warriors, stuff like that, they're not going to be included on this list, even though I would like to because there are some great ones out there, but those can get their own videos. So I might do one on hack and slash maybe in the future, but for now we're just gonna stick to the beat 'em up genre. So with that said, let me get started. Now most of us growing up here in the States grew up playing Kung Fu on the NES. I know I did. It was one of my first black box games when I got the NES, and it was actually pretty good. And at the time I didn't know, but this was supposed to be a port of the arcade game Kung Fu Master. Now Kung Fu Master was an arcade game that was released in 1984 by Irem, and it's considered to be the father of all beat 'em ups. The game was an inspiration from the Bruce Lee flick Death Game, where the main character has to pretty much ascend a pagoda to reach the final boss all the way at the top. The game is very fast paced and is still lots of fun to play even today. Play it if you get a chance. This right here is where it all started. Cool little trivia, the composer of this arcade, Masato Ishisaki, went on to also compose the music on the arcade game R-Type. Now Karateka here could have been the father of beat 'em ups, but trailed Kung Fu Master by only a couple months, and it was released for the Apple II originally on December 1984. If Kung Fu Master was the fast-paced action game we all asked for, Karateka was the polar opposite of that. It was slow-paced compared to Kung Fu Master, but what it lacked in speed, it made up in gameplay and presentation. All the movements were rotoscoped, meaning it felt and looked very lifelike. Very cool for that time. The action scenes were actually interrupted momentarily by cutscenes depicting what was happening between your sweetheart and the final boss, who had kidnapped her. And it kinda lent the game a cinematic movie feel to it, which again was also unheard of at that time. Really cool stuff. I love the ending where you run up to Mariko, that's her name by the way, and she knocks you out with one hit, forcing you to play it all over again. I had no idea at the time why this was happening, but eventually I found out that you have to walk up to her like a gentleman in order to get the proper ending. The game was created by one person, believe it or not, Jordan Mechner, while he was a student at Yale. That's pretty freaking awesome. Good job there, Jordan. Now Sega took a quick stab at the genre when they released My Hero in 1985. This game right here took a more modern urban look when compared to Kung Fu and Karateka. It was fast paced and very colorful. If you like Kung Fu, then most likely you're gonna like this one since it's pretty much the same kind of gameplay. Also, what is up with his eye? It just keeps moving back. It's weird. Now Konami also took a shot when they released Shaolins Road that same year. The arcade was somewhat different from the others since it allowed movements not only left to right, but you can move up and down in the level. And each level pretty much took place on one big screen, but you had a lot of freedom and movement within that big screen. It was another step in the evolution of fighting games back in the day. Play it at least once, you might like it. Now, 1986, however, that was the year that the beat 'em up would evolve to the next level.
Good luck, kid.
That was the year Neketsu Koakunio Kun was released in Japan by Taito. Now, the title basically translates to hot-blooded tough guy Kunio in Japanese. The title would be brought to the States entitled Renegade. It introduced the world to the belt-scrolling format in beat-em-ups. That pretty much is the mechanic that would be used from that point forward for the majority of all fighting games. I'm not saying all of them, but a good majority of them, all the way to present time. Renegade was the first beat-em-up to allow for movement not only from left to right, but up and down, kind of like a quasi 3D-ish type of look. And it opened up gameplay tremendously when compared to 2D beat 'em up games back in the day. Now, if Kung Fu Master is considered the father of beat 'em ups, Renegade here is kind of like the close uncle. My first exposure to Renegade was actually on the NES, not on the arcade. In fact, I wasn't even aware there was a Renegade game in the arcades until many years later. If you want to see where the next evolutionary step in beat 'em ups took place, play this game right here. It's not easy, but it's a pretty good game overall. Try it out. Now, Express Raider here came out the same year as Renegade. It didn't bring anything new to the table, but I find it to be like one of those little known arcade gems that is actually pretty cool once you get to play it. I love the stage where you actually get to ride on the horse and you're shooting bad guys that are opening windows on the train. I thought for the time that was a pretty cool level. And let's face it, there's not a lot of Western beat-em-ups out there. So this game was actually a welcome addition to the beat-em-up. It's still fun to play even today, check it out. Now, before we leave 1986, let's give a quick shout out to Black Belt on the Master System. Now, this was loosely based on the Fist of the North Star manga from Japan, but slightly changed for the Western audience. Now, when I say change, I mean it was stripped of all its ties to the Fist of the North Star, and pretty much at that point just became like a Kung Fu clone from NES. Well, or the arcade, if you want to look at it that way. And it actually had very nice graphics from the time. As you can see here, it has a little bit of parallax scrolling as well. Not one of the best at that time, but I think it was a nice addition to add to your library of games if you had a Master System. Small known fact is that Yuji Naka, who was one of the programmers for this game right here, went on to create Sonic the Hedgehog. Hey, that's not bad. Every genre has a breakthrough title. You know, one of those games that just elevates the whole genre to a whole new level, brings something to the table that no other had at that time, and pretty much becomes popular and attains cult status, basically. Double Dragon, right here, is just that game. And it was released in 1987. This two-player arcade hit took everything from its predecessors and pretty much magnified it all. It was two players, it had great graphics, lots of fighting moves, great sound effects, great soundtrack, and most of all, it was fun to play. Correction, it's still fun to play. It was developed by Technos, and the lead programmer was Yoshihisa Kishimoto, the same man who had developed Neketsu Koa Kunio-kun, Renegade, basically. The double in the name was in reference to having two-player co-op, and the dragon part was in reference to the Bruce Lee flick Enter the Dragon. This was supposed to be a direct sequel to Renegade, believe it or not, but the graphics were pretty much altered and changed to appeal to a more global audience, and this is the end result. Not bad if you ask me. I still love playing this game from time to time. Lots of fun. But before we leave 1987, I want to give a shout out to one game, and that game is Avengers. Not the Avengers, just Avengers. Now, this game here was made by Capcom. It's one of the few top-down beat-em-ups ever. It wasn't Capcom's first entry to fighting games, because I'm gonna say Trojan takes that honor, but Trojan is a hack and slash and therefore not gonna be part of this list. There aren't many top-down brawlers out there, and I think this is one of the first. If I'm wrong on that, please go ahead and correct me down in the comments below. I would really like to know what was the first top-down brawler. I think it's this one, but again, I could be wrong. Now we enter the golden age. The golden age of brawlers. This is when the genre really took off, and that year was 1988. Now, one of the big hits of that year came to us courtesy of the great arcade maker Sega. That game, Altered Beast. So basically what this game did was it went back to the Kung Fu formula, and by that I mean it went back to the 2D plane beat 'em up, but it added a mythological setting to it, the ability to change to different beast forms, and some really nice graphics for that time. It's one of those big arcade breakouts of that year, and this here was just the beginning.
Welcome to your doom.
Data East strikes again, but this time they stick to the 2D plane brawler when they release Bad Dudes on the arcade. Now, this brawler had one of the cheesiest storylines of any arcade at that time. I mean, come on, President Ronnie, okay, because they didn't even call him Ronald Reagan, of course, in the arcade. They just call him President Ronnie. He gets kidnapped by God knows who, and the government says, hey, how do we save him? Oh, I know, let's send two guys, each wearing black tank tops and white pajama pants, jogging pants or whatever, and hopefully they can save Ronnie. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean President Reagan. Yeah, all that aside though, it's not a bad game. It's actually quite fun. Obviously, one of the most classic and memorable stages in the game is actually the second stage, where you are fighting atop a semi-truck. Yeah, and every time I saw The Matrix Part 2, where they were fighting on top of the trucks, I always thought of Bad Dudes. And I wonder if that served as some kind of inspiration, who knows. But if you get a chance to play Bad Dudes in the arcade version, check it out, it's not bad. And if you save the president, you get to chill out with him and eat some cheeseburgers. I mean, does it get better than that? I don't think so.
I'm bad!
1988 also saw the return of Double Dragon. The one that elevated the genre to a whole new level was back, and I couldn't wait to play this game. And it was pretty much very similar to the first one, and it was titled Double Dragon 2, The Revenge. Why? Because the first thing that they do, the bad guys, they shoot your girlfriend. I mean, part 1, they kidnapped her. Okay, you know, you can still save her. Part 2, they're like, no, forget it, we're just gonna kill her. No, try saving her now. What a bunch of a-holes. Now, one of the big changes in this game was the controls. And I'll be honest with you, even at that time, I did not like the change in the controls, because basically you had two buttons. And depending on which way you were facing, it would allow you to attack in front of you or behind you. And over time, I kind of figured out that this control scheme was actually better than the first, because it allowed you more control, and it pretty much prevented you from getting ganged up on from both sides. But back in the day, I did not like the control scheme, and it's one of the few reasons I didn't play it as much as the first one. But once you get past that little learning curve with the controls, you're gonna find out that it's a much better control scheme than the first one. Everything else is pretty much the same. It has good graphics, you know, good sound effects. Obviously the gameplay is fun. It's pretty much the same as part 1 as far as that is concerned, and unfortunately the slowdown, it's on this one as well. It's still fun though. Vigilante was the spiritual successor to Kung Fu Master, and it was developed by who else? Irem. It took the same mechanics of Kung Fu Master, spruced up the graphics a bit, and placed it in a suburban atmosphere. The gameplay, it was nothing new, but it had solid sound effects that made you feel every punch you gave out. It was awesome. Not a huge leap or even a small leap in the progression of beat 'em ups, but it is a classic, and it even got a nice port on the TurboGrafx 16. I had this game on the TurboGrafx. Pretty good. Now here is a change of pace for once. A good, solid Superman game. I know, you heard me correctly, it's a good Superman game. The golden age of beat 'em ups was so good that a Superman game that's actually good came out during that time. Now Superman in the arcades was developed by Taito, and it took place in a standard 2D plane, but what's different here is that you can fly. So you weren't just confined to walking. Some levels had you flying up, some had you flying down, and others were kind of like a shooter stage. You could punch and kick your enemies, and you even had a punch where you can actually store up power and release like a ball of energy. You even had laser shots from your eyes, which you could actually use during those stages that kind of look like a shooter stage. Did I mention that this is an actual good Superman game? Wow, we're not even close to finishing out 1988 yet. And out of nowhere, we got Tecmo coming out with the arcade game that will be reinvented in the NES to great success. If you guessed Ninja Gaiden, you are absolutely correct. Now, what's cool about this game is that it combined martial arts and a modern day setting into one to give the game a very distinct feel for that time. It had that unique ability that allowed you, as a player, to grab onto horizontal bars to allow you to kick enemies in both directions. You can also flip, well, kind of like somersault over your enemies to grab them from the head and flip them over, which was pretty cool. The NES took a more fast-paced and hack and slash approach and added cinematics, but if you've never played the arcade, make some time and check it out. I would not call it one of the best beat 'em ups out there for that time, but it's one of the most memorable. Check it out. You're not going to be disappointed. One thing I will always remember about Ninja Gaiden though, that brutal continue screen. Man, if you didn't pop in that quarter, you had that visual on your head of what happened next. The programmers really wanted to hammer that guilt into you. I still think to this day that this is one of the most intense continue screens ever. Splatterhouse is next on the list here for 1988. It took a horror approach to the beat 'em up genre, and in the process provided gamers with like a new look and feel to go along with what will become one of the best beat 'em up and cult classics of that time. I was so stoked when it came to the TurboGrafx. Now think about it, up until that time we played as Kung Fu masters, ninjas, cowboys, even Superman, but this game put you in the shoes of Rick, who looks like Jason Voorhees, manages to kill like Jason, but his name is Rick. This game was gory as hell too. Lots of fun though. In the same year, we got SNK bringing us POW, Prisoners of War. So basically that's what you are. You're a prisoner of war and you break out and start kicking some ass. This game had some real nice tight controls and some kick-ass punching sound effects. Love them. And the gameplay was very similar to Double Dragon as well. It was lots of fun. The NES port was actually not that bad either. And I rented that one quite a few times, but I could never beat it for some reason. I always thought this game should have been Ikari Warriors 3, and the Ikari Warriors 3 game should have been POW. But that's just me. If you have a chance, go ahead and try this one out. It's a lot of fun, although it's not easy at all. But go ahead and try it. You're gonna have lots of fun playing it. So as you can see, 1988 was a very, very busy year. But now it's on to 1989. Now the first game that I'm going to point out in 1989 is not an arcade game. It's actually a home console game. I want to talk about River City Ransom. I rented this one back in the day, and this game really took me by surprise. I thought it's going to be another just Double Dragon clone with cute little graphics. Oh man, was I so wrong. This game took RPG elements and blended them in like in an interesting manner. You could upgrade your skills and stats by buying food, drinks, and even books you could read. These would actually help you power up your skills, such as your power, your stamina, and so forth. And you can buy all this stuff from the coins that are dropped from your enemies as you beat them up. It wasn't even a linear game. You didn't proceed from level to level like other games of that time. This one had kind of like an open world feel to it, where you can actually travel back and forth between different sections, and in between each sections from time to time you would come across like a shopping center, which is where you would buy all the food and the items that you wanted to help you level up your skills. It was a really cool concept for that time, and I'm kind of surprised that it's not done more often. You don't see a lot of games like that. This was a huge leap at that time for the genre. It's a shame this concept was not really tackled more often since it came out, because it really adds a lot of replayability to the beat 'em up genre. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend you do so. It's a lot of fun. Check it out. My recommendation is, if you're going to play it though, try to play it on your Switch or some other way where you're allowed to have save features, because that password feature, oh god, is it horrible. The game's awesome though. There was a sequel released only in Japan for the Super NES, but it was never released here. Why? I have no idea, because that's a shame. Well, at least we always have the Game Boy Advance remake. Now, Crime Fighters here was not the first arcade game to have 4-player co-op, but it was the first for the beat 'em up genre. It was made by Konami, and it actually beat Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to the arcades by a couple of months. Obviously, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles turned out to be much more popular, for good reason. But we can't deny Crime Fighters for what it brought to the table at that time. Each player controlled the same and had the exact same moves. The only thing that was different between each player was the color palette. The game was also different in that it had a number on top that showed how much health you had. There was no health meter. And much like Gauntlet, it also slowly depleted over time, whether you were fighting or not. The backstory for this game was not very original either. You were basically 4 undercover cops who had to go and save some damsels that had gotten, what do you know, kidnapped by a mob or some type of organization. Who knows? Try it out if you get a chance, just to say you played it. It's not bad. Now Sega took a quick swing at the beat 'em up genre when they released the Sega Genesis, and one of their launch titles was Last Battle. If you're a fan of Fist of the North Star, this game right here is for you. It's the sequel to Black Belt for the Master System, but it was once again stripped of all ties to Fist of the North Star when it was released here in the States. You advanced in each stage with a time limit. If the time ran out, your health starts to deplete slowly. It did take place in a 2D plane. The game didn't really bring anything new to the table, but it was part of that Genesis launch lineup and not a bad game overall. Downtown on the arcades was released in 1989 as well, and it was developed by Seda, not Sega, Seda. Alongside Avengers from Capcom, it is one of the few overhead beat-em-ups ever, which is kind of why I put it on this list. The graphics on this one are really sharp and clean, and I think it may be one of the few times that I've seen a guy in pants, shirt, and a tie really kicking some ass in the streets. Now, the only reason I bring up this one is because, again, it's one of those rare top-down beat-em-ups. Try it out, who knows, you may like it. Speaking of overhead brawlers, SNK decided to make Ikari Warriors 3 a beat-em-up instead of a shooter. Not sure why, I guess, well, again, this was the golden age of beat-em-up, so maybe that's why they did it. The game isn't too bad. The arcade had that same little rotary control knob, which caused your character to move in all different directions. I was never really a big fan of that control scheme. Now, the NES port was actually pretty good, and not very well known when compared to part 1 and 2. Now, little known fact is that the NES port of this game right here was the only one of the 3 made by SNK themselves, with part 1 and 2 made by Micronics when it was released here in the States. The NES also had some great beat-em-ups up until that point. You had Double Dragon 1 and 2, obviously, River City Ransom, which I just talked about, Renegade, and even had some good ports of POW and Kung Fu, but there is still one game that I need to mention for 89. That game is Batman. Now, I'm not sure about anyone else out there, but this game was one of those games that actually took me by surprise, like River City Ransom. Usually superhero games were kind of like a toss-up. You might get a good one, you might not. So when I actually rented Batman, I didn't buy it, I rented it from Blockbuster. I was actually very surprised. Now, I was not expecting it to be as good as it was. It was created by Sunsoft, and it was a beat-em-up that took perfect advantage of that superhero content. It had tight controls, great gameplay, and again, some really atmospheric music to create that classic hit. It was not an easy game either, by no means. If you can get past that difficulty curve of the game and you're a Batman fan, this one here, you gotta try it out. It's a good game. So after talking about so many great beat-em-ups, there's only one way to end the 80s, just one. What better way than to bring in Final Fight into the conversation? Now, this one here, considered by many to be one of the greatest beat-em-up of all time. And originally it was going to be called Street Fighter 89, and it was going to incorporate Ryu and Ken into the gameplay, but after some changes, obviously, they decided to go a whole different route, and what we got is this game right here. Now, one of the things that's going to stand out right away in this game are the huge sprites. When compared to other games of that same era, this game was like 5 years ahead of its time. But it wasn't just the graphics that stood out. You had amazing controls, very tight controls, great soundtrack, and great sound effects. What was cool about this game was the co-op. You had 3 characters, and you and your friend can join at any time together and battle through the streets to save Hagar's daughter, who was kidnapped again by some... What is it with these bad guys? Just kidnapping girls. My goodness. Now, for many years online, there's been rumors that this game right here was inspired by the movie Streets of Fire, which was released back in 1984. The funny thing is, if you go online and read some of the pages and websites that have interviews with the programmers of the game, they don't necessarily dismiss that idea. So who knows? The funny part is that one of the characters in Final Fight, named Cody, kind of looks like the character from Streets of Fire, the main character, whose name is actually Tom Cody. And in that movie, once again, there's a gang that kidnaps the girl, and Tom Cody has to save her. So now, did the programmers really get their inspiration from that movie? Who knows? It's from '84, and again, a lot of games back then were taking that same storyline and putting it in their game. So I guess in a way you could say they did use that movie as inspiration. Or maybe they've just played other games, beat 'em ups from that time, and they got that inspiration from those games. The point is, the movie was actually fun to watch, but the game, even more fun. Try it out. Alright, with that said, we have come to a close for the 1980s. We saw the emergence of the beat 'em up genre with Kung Fu Master by Irem, then slightly improved upon with the release of Renegade by Taito, and popularized by the classic arcade hit Double Dragon from Technos. Splatterhouse brought a horror theme to the table, and River City Ransom blended RPG elements on the NES to bring out a really unique yet really fun beat 'em up to the console side of gaming. Oh, I almost forgot, but I need to give a shout out to Double Dragon on the Master System. Sure, we all played the NES version. I had it. I loved it. But I was lucky enough to have a friend who had a Master System, and I loved the fact that Double Dragon on the Sega console had 2 players and was very faithful to the arcade. We had so much fun playing that on weekends. Great times, great game. If you haven't tried it, go ahead and play the Master System version. Now, if I missed out on a favorite of yours, don't worry. There's a lot of games that I didn't put on this list, on this video, for reasons such as maybe they didn't bring enough to the table that revolutionized or took that next step in the beat 'em up genre during that time, or just due to popularity. Maybe it just wasn't popular enough. Now, the 80s was a fun time for beat 'em up, since those of us who lived during that time, we saw the emergence of the beat 'em up genre, and we saw it slowly evolve into what it would become into the 90s. And as you will see on my next video, things are only gonna get better. So stay tuned for part 2 of my beat 'em up history recap as I explore many more games into the 90s. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I had a ton of fun making it. I got to play a lot of beat 'em ups that I hadn't played in years, and some of these are still fun to play today. So again, if you like this video, hopefully you'll subscribe, and until next video, as always, take care of yourselves.
I'll be coming for her, and I'll be coming for you too.
Sure you will. And I'll be waiting.